Mic's on.
All right, mic is on.
Hello? Hello? All right.
Doesn't want to stay on.
They let you go in the bank like that?
That's what I feel like, a bank robber.
After the meeting, if you want, one at a time or two, we can take you a tour. The remodel's 70% done,
Oh.
Nice.
so you can get through there, that's right. Clean it up, so you all can take a walk through.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay, I call to order the Rolesville Town Board meeting, April 21st. Welcome, commissioners, welcome staff, and welcome citizens that's watching, live streaming. We're going to try to make the meeting efficient tonight so we can kind of get through the business that we need to get through and all of us get out and get home safely. So with that said, we're going to just cut right through to the chase and get on with the business we have in hand. So first of all, for the agenda, is there any additions or changes that would like to be made to the agenda?
I saw a request where we would move item 6 for discussion. Someone wanted to do that. I don't know who it was, but if that person still wants to do that, make it known now, please.
Yes.
Okay. I move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item number 6, resolution of audit contract for discussion under board action.
Okay. Paul, did you have a change that you wanted?
Yeah, I also wanted to, under the new business, I wanted to see if we could move item number 2, consideration of policy for future remote meetings, up to the top to discuss that first before the budget.
Okay.
Just to make sure we get that in.
Yeah,
So-
well, I'll add that to the motion.
Okay, so understand we'll do the audit first. Is that right? Or we do the consideration of future remote?
Yeah, audits first. is
All
fine,
right, we'll
yep.
do the audit first, consideration of future remote meetings second, and then the capital improvement plan budget preview third. And that's your motions. I hear a second.
Wait, I just want to say something. I
Oh.
just want to make sure that what I discussed with you briefly, that's taken into consideration for the group funding committee report.
Do you want to pull that out for discussion?
No, I don't need to discuss it now, but,
We can, that has to go to staff anyways, so we
Okay.
can talk to staff. as well.
okay,
Yeah.
Yep,
that's fine, we're good.
yep.
Yeah, it's just in here as a report right now anyway,
Right,
so.
Okay,
We have to.
then I second Jackie's.
Okay, so I got a motion second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, we got agenda. Next item is we will do public invite to be heard. Under the situations that we're under today, we had asked several avenues and several ways to give us, any type of public comment you want to make, and we would make it public here in the meeting. And Robin, did we receive anything at all from the public?
No, Sir Mayor, and as a matter of fact, I had it up when you called the meeting to order, and there's still no submission.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess for people that's listening online, we do want to hear from you. If you do have anything you want to say, don't know what next meeting will be like. It may be under similar circumstances. And if so, be sure you get your public comments in to the clerk, and we will certainly want those heard if you have any. So that's just a reminder of everybody out there that we do want to hear from you. Okay, with that, next item is the consent agenda. We removed item number 6. That's kind of what we'll discuss the audit contract. What about the other items? Is any more want to be removed, or do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve consent agenda.
All right, got a motion, second.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Any more discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Very good. I think we said we would do the audit discussion next. Is that kind of what we decide?
Yep.
And who wants to lead that? Amy or you, Kelly?
I'll start off, Mr. Mayor. Today, board member Sutton called with some good questions. I felt it's good to go ahead and put it on a regular agenda so that you can hear a presentation by Amy on how and why we went through this selection process, and then you can ask any questions. So with that,
So the annual audit is something that's required by North Carolina general statutes to ensure that the town operates in a fiscally responsible manner and represents its financial statements in an appropriate way. The town has used the same auditor for as many years as we can determine in recent history. It's been quite a while since we put that service out for public bid. And so an RFP was let in late January. We received 5 responses to that bid. So we received 5 proposals for audit services for FY 1920, so the year we're in currently. We put together a small team, included Commissioner Sneed, myself, the town manager, and we also pulled in a finance director from one of our neighboring municipalities as well. So the 4 of us reviewed all of these proposals. They were submitted in, we asked the vendors to submit these proposals in 2 parts. And the first part was really oriented more around qualifications of the firms so that we could evaluate those first. After that review is done, then you open section 2, which is where you get into how they intend to conduct the audit and the pricing. Through the review of these audits, we determined that there was one firm that was far and away clearly the leader in local government accounting and auditing in our region. We found some others that were also highly competitive. So I reached out, after the group formed their consensus, I reached out to 3 of the firms and spoke with them to follow up, ask some additional questions and some clarifications. As a result of all of those, we came together again and agreed that we would recommend Cherry Bakert, LLP, to the board for the audit services for this current fiscal year. They are slightly more expensive than what we pay now. Our current auditor for the services recently performed was $20,000, both to prepare the financial statements and to perform the audit. And this new proposal is slightly more. This proposal is for $25,000, so it is an increase over what we've paid before. But we do feel that the services that this firm will provide, we anticipate that the value will be received for those additional dollars. They have extensive number of clients in local government, municipal governments, counties, and the town itself has some interesting situations coming up over the next couple of years. You know, with our LAP grant that's recently been approved, we're about to receive several $1 million in federal funds, and so we want to make sure that we are properly prepared to deal with the inflow of those funds in terms of how we set it up to maintain that tracking of those expenditures. And then the other item is also with our financial system. One of the things we're looking at, as we'll talk about a little bit later, is replacing that financial system, which requires setting up a new chart of accounts. And so having an accountant firm that can advise us on what's the best way to set up those accounts would be very beneficial at this time. And then finally, from a standpoint as the finance director, I'll tell you, having a fresh set of eyes on our operations is really something I think we can benefit from. Having somebody new come in and offer some suggestions about improvements that we can make to our internal controls and fraud prevention is something I think everybody in our staff would certainly welcome as well.
So I guess what I was looking to hear was the additional services. I heard you say the accounting part. So I was trying to figure out what was so different about them than the firm we were using for so many years.
I think what they bring to the table is extensive experience with local government clients. And so having, we don't have the ability to really dive into the intricacies of other municipalities and see how they do things. Whereas that accounting firm like that has that experience, they really get to see the inside workings of how other people are doing things. And so they'll be bringing that into what they provide to us, and hopefully offering some of those suggestions.
What are some of the clients?
So they have quite a few here in Wake County. Cary, Morrisville, Fuquay-Varina, and Wake Forest are all current clients of theirs.
And they've been for several years?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I included some of the material they had sent in what I had sent in the packet. And they have quite an extensive list, not just in Wake County, but throughout the state.
And when would they be reevaluated? I don't know this firm personally. I do know somebody who actually works there. I didn't know until I looked. But how often do we reevaluate our auditors? Because you said that it had been a long time. So how often do we have like a schedule to revisit?
So a couple of things going on here. So a lot of this process is highly regulated by the local government commission. So the contract with that firm is using the local government commission's contract. And that's an annual contract. So if we get to the end of this process and we determine that those extra funds, we really weren't getting the value out of that, we can start over and we can go out and find someone else. So technically it's a year-long contract. Ideally, you want to have that working relationship for about 3 to 5 years. Gotcha. Because it takes a while to get to know one another and then the process becomes much more efficient.
Sure, gotcha. Okay, that helps to clarify. I just saw a 25% increase and thought inflation is what, 2% maybe? Not counting the COVID issue. But I'm like, I need to understand why 25% more, why was it worth it? So thank you for breaking that down for me. I appreciate it.
So what was it, 25% more from the other, from last year, which is, is it 25% more than last year, or is it 25% more from what the other, I guess?
Both. 20,000 was your previous cost, and then the range of services were in the 18 to 20,000 for the other 4 finalists.
So the old firm would have done it the same price they've been doing.
That's what they put in.
So, I think, by doing it over and over and over, you should be able to do it cheaper because, you know what you're doing a little bit. So, I guess a good question to ask going forth as we analyze them for future years, how often do they go up in price and stuff?
They provide if I may, I think if I remember this proposal, you asked for a 3-year, and they provided a steady rate for 3 years.
But this is good for 3 years if we choose.
Is that right?
Yeah, I believe I have to go back and look at it. Each one was slightly different, but we did ask for 3 years of prices. Obviously focusing more on the first year. As we do get those federal funds, regardless of who the auditing firm is, some of that pricing may change.
So is the pricing based on something, the size of the town, the financial, budget or something? In other words, does it escalate as we grow, financially? It does.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, there's certain testing that they do based on the number of transactions. And then really for us, because these firms write the financial statements and then turn around and audit them, a lot of the work that they're doing is actually the writing of those financial statements.
Right.
And so that, again, is also dependent upon your dollars, your number of transactions, the complexity of your funds and what you have.
I would think they charge and carry more than 25,000.
And Raleigh. They have Raleigh too, right? I think they have Raleigh.
They have Raleigh too?
I think they have Raleigh, right?
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see when we, like Amy said, in 2 years when we have the federal money. So federal money will require what they call a single audit. So they will have to isolate that out. So you'll have the regular audit, and then you'll have a single audit just on the federal funds because the federal government requires that. And so they'll have to spend more time. They'll go through greater detail and depth in those on that the audit. But we don't have a pricing for that yet. I don't think. I'm not certain. But.
Yeah, my personal view, I like the ones we had. They've done a good job for us the last, at least I'm speaking for 18 years, and I know they were here longer than that, but, they did a very, very good job, and they've always been good to work with, and they always been what I always think trustworthy and honest about, all the transactions they did for us. But I do understand, where you're coming from. It is the changing times. Our financial needs is changing, and I do understand that we may be at a threshold that we need to look at somebody that's more in keen with our business of town. So. I understand, the reason you're asking for this.
And I think it's probably a good practice just to think about when you use vendors. I try to help my husband see this. When you're with somebody for 15 and 20 years as far as a vendor, like we have USAA, and you never go to market to see kind of what's out there. You may not be getting the best deal, or you may not be getting the latest and the greatest. So I think it's a good practice just to revisit, but I just wanted to understand the pricing difference since we had them for so long. So thank you for that.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the audit contract with Cherry Beckert LLP for $25,000 for the fiscal year ending June 20th, 2020.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion and we got a second. Is it any more discussion? Everybody good? Michelle, you good over there? All right, I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposing? All right, unanimous. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kelly, for bringing that to us. Appreciate that.
And April did a nice job helping us too.
Yeah, she did.
Thanks, team.
So, and also, whoever it was, you had somebody from another municipality too. So, thank y'all for spending some time and coming up with it. Next item, I think Paul is asking that let's go ahead and look at the consideration of a policy for future remote meetings. And I guess, Dave, between you and Kelly, guys going to present something on that?
Yeah, so Dave's going to present. In your packet, you have the policy with the red line of the version that you adopted on, I believe our last meeting was March 16th. And during that time, we were uncertain where we were going and how our capabilities were, but we thought we better have some policy. So you took advantage of that time and adopted a policy. Since then, we've had the opportunity to spend many hours learning, listening, and trying to comprehend where we might go in the future with remote meetings. And so between Dave and Robin and myself, Dave has crafted an amended policy for you to consider that you may use, and I'll let Dave delve into that.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Members of the board, the amended policy that you see before you, you'll remember when we took this up at the March 17th meeting, I advised you that the authority of municipalities to have electronic meetings, or virtual meetings as the term has become popularly known in the past week and a half to 2 weeks, was uncertain. The North Carolina School of Government had advised that it was a risky behavior and that generally the safer path was to accord yourself with the idea of having a designated place and securing a quorum before you allowed remote participation by certain members. In late March, the North Carolina Attorney General's Office issued an advisory opinion providing that given the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in under the conditions of the pandemic, it was the opinion of the Attorney General's Office that electronic meetings for local governments was permitted. With that new guidance, it seemed reasonable to pursue a set of policies that would allow the town to use electronic meetings if the board so desired. And so that explains the revisions you see now. We still have our remote participation policy that would be used whenever is necessary to account for a member or two who are unable to attend a meeting. But in particular emergency circumstances, we would have the opportunity to use an electronic meeting. Okay? So the way this works, and I know I don't want to read it back to you, so let me do this. The way it would work, and you may be seeing Raleigh and Wake Forest have already adopted a form of electronic meeting. The way this would work is that all of us would participate from our own separate locations, and we would be convening on a single platform, whether that be WebEx or Zoom or a conference call or something that's invented 20 years from now. So however that structure would be, the requirement, however, is that all members have reasonable equal access and the public have access to observe or watch those meetings.
But they wouldn't participate, the public.
The public would have, we would be working to make all reasonable accommodations so that the public would be able to participate as close to the same way the public participates in a normal meeting here at Town Hall. So as to required public comment period, it would be hopefully very similar to what we're doing here today. There's also the opportunity to essentially have a public comment period where the clerk would activate the microphone for those who have signed up in advance, and they would have a period of time where they could speak. They would essentially have the floor for that period of time in the virtual web conference or on the conference call. With regard to hearings, and we'll move from easy to difficult on this. Public comment, Robin and I and the manager have been able to pretty much solve that for today with very little trouble. The next level of difficulty would be a public hearing. So in that case, we would have a virtual meeting where we would need to be able to share both the presentations by staff and by the applicant, together with any materials that they had, plus then be able to open a public hearing and receive comment from members of the public who are interested. We believe that that's something that we also could pull off given the technology we have, and we have seen that be done already by a few other municipalities, and we have watched what has worked and what has been difficult. The final option, or the final public participation event, would be the quasi-judicial or evidentiary hearing. That raises greater concerns for your town attorney as to how one could pull that off and still protect all the due process rights of the parties to that hearing. In those hearings, you have sworn testimony with competent evidence that is to be presented in a way that allows the board to evaluate that evidence for competency and honesty, and allows the participants, both those pro and against, to be able to present their legal cases in the manner they prefer. You can start to imagine how that gets challenging. How would one object, for example? How does one be sworn in by a notary public? You know, all those sort of little things. Rather than try and tackle that for the meeting tonight, we are proposing in this to the board, and this is the board's decision, obviously, to not have quasi-judicial hearings in the electronic or virtual setting. Those would be pushed until we can next convene. Keep in mind, however, that if we were to convene in an electronic setting, we would have a real meeting where legislative choices could be made, ordinances could be adopted, and policies could be amended. So in the right set of emergencies, we could revisit the quasi-judicial setting even if we never had the opportunity to meet physically. Are there any questions?
I have one question about one item that was stricken on, in this, where it said, each vote taken during an electronic meeting shall be by roll call. The town clerk shall call upon each member individually to verbally cast his or her vote, A or nay, in such a manner as can be clearly heard by all members. And that's struck, all right? So, I mean, if we're having a virtual meeting, how do I know how everybody else votes without this being in there?
So, what you see there, you're seeing the sausage get made between the town attorney and the town manager.
Right.
So that's what you're seeing there. The red line you have before you is the red line differences between my initial draft and Kelly's comments and my additional thinking on this. One thing that is in the tradition of the town of Rolesville is that this has always been a very collegial board with a more casual parliamentary approach.
Okay.
If it's required that roll calls be taken, the clerk and the mayor have that power already, and that doesn't need to be set out in the policy, is our thinking. Right now, if all the members of the board were at each other's throats and you couldn't hear what was going on, the mayor has every bit of authority to gavel order and take a roll call vote.
Yep.
Imagine now in the electronic setting, the same thing happens. We're all talking over each other. You can't tell what is going on. The mayor will ask the clerk, or the mayor himself will call a roll. And so the thinking is, we don't have to write that down. We already have that procedure. And we didn't want to overly legalize this thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think whatever electronic means, whether it's Zoom or whatever, we'll be able to see each other, right?
That's right.
So it's not like a conference call or something. We'll be able to see each other, and it's kind of like it is today. You know, we call for a vote. You know, I can hear the ayes, and I'll call for nays, and I can hear the nays too. So
To me, that's really risky.
I'm with Jackie.
For instance, we're going to have a vote soon that I have to recuse myself for in regard to some townhomes.
that's
So
quasi-judicial, though, I think.
Okay. Oh, that's quasi. That's right. All right. So but in the event that we did have something like that, I mean, sometimes I can look around this room when we say votes, and I can see some people that didn't move their lips hardly, and I'm saying, did he or she vote for it or not? You know, when
But you'd hear
when
the
Michelle
name,
made a comment a while ago, her microphone, she's moved it right now, but it was down like this, I couldn't hear her. You know, this is risky.
The only thing I would say, just from a policy perspective, I think it's good to have it in writing, not necessarily that statement that was stricken, but what you stated about the mayor or the clerk being able to take a roll call if necessary. To me, that makes it very clear to the public, that makes it clear to boards coming beyond us. Because you could have a rowdy board. You could have a Durham school board, I remember that from back in the day, about ready to throw blows. Stuff could happen. Policy outlives people and positions. So I think something should be said. It doesn't have to be that legalese that's there, but something to the effect of what you said, to me, makes sense.
If the board thinks that's a good idea, we can certainly make sure that that is in there. One thing that the manager and I and the clerk were talking about this past week is that as far as we are aware in reviewing the records of the town, our town code and town policies, we have never officially adopted any set of parliamentary rules. And if you look at my bio, you'll see that at one time I had the title parliamentarian. So many communities have adopted as a backup Robert's Rules of Order or something along those lines. That helps fill in the gaps when you're not sure what order do folks go in or what vote has priority. We've never done that because this board, as far as I've worked with it for 15 years, you guys have always been able to work it out, you and your predecessors. But the mayor, as the presiding officer, presumptively has all those powers. That's why we give him the gavel.
Does an individual commissioner who may want to make a motion and get a second have the right to call for a roll call vote?
An individual member has a right to request a roll.
Okay.
Requested.
Okay.
Yeah, even after the vote, you can do that.
Yep.
You can have a show of hands.
Okay.
You can ask for
Okay.
a show. And
That'd make more sense on like a video thing, just to make sure everything's,
Yeah.
everybody knows what everybody's saying and everything
Yeah.
else. Yeah, I mean, that would probably make sense with that.
That is completely in order.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have removed the sunset provision from this, only because now I've had 2 opportunities to go through it, but we can certainly keep that in if you want to leave that as a sunset for December 31st of this year.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm okay either way. What do you guys think?
I'm okay with leaving it in right now, because we don't know what the fall's gonna bring.
So you're saying leave it, so we might be able to revisit it if we need to. Yeah, I'm good either way.
The only difference between those two is one leaves a perpetual policy, the other would require it be revisited before the end of December. You're burdening yourself with revisiting this and hearing from me again on the topic.
Gotcha. Now that you put it that way.
But you said that we can always go back and make changes.
Always,
We
you
could
can-
revisit it at any time. We just, even if it's closed, we don't have to leave it open in order to revisit it ever again.
No, the only thing that a town attorney would always advise is please amend your policy and then do that policy, rather than change how you do things and then amend your policy afterward. That always looks.
And that's the point I was just making to Jackie's point. So if someone new comes on the board and there is some scuffle, I'm just imagining, right? And someone's not so cordial and we can't move forward, whatever, or they can't move forward. I think it just helps to put that part in there about the mayor who has the right to call for a roll call for that purpose. Because it may appear to the public or the new person to the board that, oh, you're changing the rules of the game now that I have something to say. I'm just saying it.
Or go
Coming from an
ahead and
HR
adopt-
background, stuff happens.
Or go ahead and adopt the parliamentarian, or whatever you said.
Rules of order, Robert's Rules of Order.
Which is what we had used before at the chamber, just so that there is a groundwork. So, there's always something to fall back on instead of questions flying around and no one knowing the answers.
I'm just not comfortable with, it's never happened, so.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Especially as we grow as a town.
And
Stuff happens.
allow me to clarify, the concern that the manager and I shared is that for the first time ever, we were writing a policy as to how this board conducts itself, and we've never done that before. Instead, we've allowed custom and practice to guide this board for 100 years. If we write the rule in the electronic meeting section, it raises a new question. Well, what is the rule if y'all get rowdy here? Does the mayor only have this power when we're in the electronic setting? That's what some lawyer would argue. And that's why we cut it out.
I hear you. I've stated my concern.
I'll just say, Mayor, if I might, as a maturing community, as a maturing operations, and what issues are going to come in front of you, not tonight necessarily, but sometime in the future, I do think and advise you to consider a work session on Robert's rules. And where do you want to go with that? Because I do think it is a good backup. Most governing bodies I've worked with always have that and have used it when needed, or formally have used it. I'm not certain it needs to be tonight, but I think it would be a great topic for you all to talk about when we have a chance under normal circumstances.
And before we endorse it, we are gonna need a workshop on Robert's Rules as well. It's complicated.
Oh, we can
Very
get
complicated.
well, you can get a high school parliamentarian class in here and teach you real fast.
Oh, Lord.
They're wonderful.
We may not even be able to get a motion through if we, especially get second a couple times and a couple changes being
Yeah, I mean, you
requested.
gotta be on your toes.
Yeah.
You adopt it.
So the one that struck through, can we just change the first sentence of it to set? Well, I'm just saying, like, if we leave it in there for now, I just don't want to let this go, and we don't do anything tonight on this either.
Forget all about it.
So can you change the first sentence to, the mayor has the power to request request a roll call
Authority.
vote for authority? Yeah, just to kind of fix that up a little bit, that first sentence,
That
and then
sounds
from then on,
familiar.
it kind of tells you what to do if you want that option. Just so it's in
Make a
there.
motion, I'll second that.
I had a hard enough time getting that out of there the first time. So
So which sentence are we changing?
the first sentence on that's
7.15.
7.1.5.
The struck out one?
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion will be, make a motion to adopt the remote participation policy as amended and restated with the following exception. On paragraph 7.1.5, we give the mayor authority to call for a roll call in an electronic meeting
As needed.
as needed.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second?
I second it.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Everybody good? All in favor, say aye.
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 Need a roll call? Aye.
I think that was all ayes. Any opposed? I hear anybody opposing, say now. All right, I think it passed unanimously, so appreciate that, Jackie, appreciate the board in doing that. Hopefully next month we can get business back normal and won't have to ever use this thing, but
Hope so, right.
it does not look like it. That may be the possibility, so.
Just want to comment on that, if you don't mind, Mayor. I think that we have this room reserved for Tuesdays through June, so there will never be any activity over here through Tuesday nights. Normal may be this, with public maybe, if we get there, and staging, if they have public hearings. I don't know about quasi judicial yet or such, but there will not be any planning board meetings until end of May. So as far as your agenda goes in May, and I don't have it in front of me, but there will not be any land use issues that require public hearings in front of you in May.
But I think if I read what we just approved, the other bodies can use this same process. So,
For the people, we have some public hearings scheduled, right? Last meeting.
I had to go back. I'm having a conversation, so just on that note, I am having a scheduling meeting with the planning director this week, and we're going to set the meetings of land uses in front of you in the planning commission for the next 4 months. I know they're kind of queuing up, and I don't want to burden your schedule. So what we're going to do is, and I don't have that right in front of me, Mr. Wilson. I do remember there probably were some that were supposed to come in front of you. I can't remember the status of those.
yeah, it was some that's supposed to come, the
Yeah.
meeting that was canceled.
I know.
That's
It's
right.
cross-
So I take back maybe what I said, and we may need to think about that a little bit.
But I think at least one of those was quasi judicial, which.
Yeah.
There was
And-
one.
and
That's right.
when and speaking on selfishly, because we have an attorney and everything, we have to set that up or counsel it
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. So we do need to reach out to the people
Mm-hmm.
who have public hearings to let them know what's going on.
Danny has been doing that this week and asking them for input. And so we're going to have that discussion this week, and hopefully with the mayor, we're going to kind of set that calendar in the next week and a half.
Kelly, when you said through June, is that the end of June or the beginning of June?
So anticipating this kind of setup, and if we were to minimize public in here and have to kind of stage them in the other room, we have that reserved through the end of June.
Okay, the end of June. And by staging, you mean stagger?
What's that?
What do you mean by staging? Is
Just said
staging
that we would
staggering?
have minimum people in here. and
Okay,
they
so
were-
staggering
Yeah,
in from
staggered,
them,
right,
okay.
right, based upon the issue.
Right. Yeah, you know, under our present conditions, Wake County is asking us not to do any congregation at all. But you know, hopefully at some point it will be, as long as you can meet the conditions of the 6 foot, you know, thing. But we'll have to kind of wait and see. But we want our
I'm sorry, does that mean that we won't be bringing anyone else in? Just so I can kind of understand.
We could. I mean, we'll have to kind of see what the conditions is going to be recommended by Chairman Greg Ford and others. But if the recommendation is to have meetings, but you can, as long as you can maintain the social distancing, then that's a lot different than what it is today. Because as you see, you know, we probably could get 10, 12 people in here additional if we could do that. Won't be
I'm
able
just
to
gonna
do a
say,
full house.
That doesn't look like it's 6 feet apart. What is it?
Oh, and they're not.
Like 3 feet.
That's not 6 feet
Probably
apart.
not, we haven't really.
Oh, okay, just making
This is
sure.
left over from a month ago. We haven't done the whole.
Okay,
And according to Governor Cooper's statement at his 2 o'clock press conference today, he is issuing a new order to replace the old one that we should have latter part of this week. Am I correct?
That's what I hear.
And so we probably need to sit still until we hear what that's going to be. Because I believe that's going to guide the county commissioners too.
Yes, his present order, if I understand it correctly, is you can have 10 with social distancing, which that wouldn't help us a whole lot. But we'll see. Okay, moving on. Appreciate that. Appreciate you putting the policy together there, David. And, at least we got something in case we need it. Next item is the capital improvement plan and budget review. I think Amy and Kelly, you guys was going to do that.
Yeah, let me introduce it and then turn it over to Amy. So, as last year, we're kind of following what we did last year and got interrupted by our current environment a bit. But what we like to do is bring to you the capital plan for kind of a discussion tonight and a revenue discussion, which is a lot different than we've had in the past. To kind of pick your brain to see what you're thinking about for revenues also, and where you think you land based upon what we know. The recommended budget will be delivered to you by mid-May or thereabouts. And we will have the second meeting in May be focused on the recommended budget, of which much of tonight will be in that unless things change. So tonight is really a work session time. It's for you to kind of see the thinking behind the capital plan, behind our revenues. And then also we have a section in there to talk about the employee performance plan that we kind of promised we'd get back around to last year. We talked about how we want to kind of modify that approach. So Amy has been doing a lot of work on this while I've been dealing with COVID-19 issues. And then between us, we've been able to spend some time with our department heads who got started on this probably about 2 months ago in earnest, if not earlier. There are still some gaps in it as far as the future. Ms. Medley and I had that conversation today that I still don't have in this, how do we proceed on some of the big, or how do we fund some potentially big town-like projects? What I do have in this, and Amy will go through, is some steps to get there so we can start making some decisions. But there's not a dollar amount set forth in the next 5 years for some pretty big significant projects that I anticipate you're going to want to do within that time period, if not sooner. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Amy, let her go through it, And we're here to listen and let you ask questions as long as you want. I told the mayor this could go no more than 45 minutes or so, but we don't intend to spend that much time at all, unless you have lots of questions, which is fine with us. So, Amy?
All right, so the presentation tonight follows a great deal along with the memo that was in your packet tonight. So, there it goes. So four areas of topic we're going to be talking about tonight. First, as we mentioned, is to go through the capital improvement plan. Then we'll secondly dive into revenue projections for next year. Then sort of a subset of that one really is talking a little bit more about the property revaluation. And then finally finishing up with just a brief preview of some of our operating budget items. So we're going to start first with the capital improvement plan, or CIP. Just as a refresher for everybody, the CIP contains expenditures that are $5,000 or more and have a useful life of 5 years or more. Okay? So this is often streets projects, park projects, and then even what I'll call sort of heavy operating expenditures like equipment replacements or purchases, technology, those sorts of things. Some of these in here are multi-year projects, things like streets or buildings typically take multi-years, but then some of these others like equipment purchases, some of those are just one-year appropriations. So at your last meeting, you approved a strategic plan for 2020 to 2022. And so as we went through your CIP requests from the departments, we made an effort to link those requests into those strategic plan goals that you adopted last month. So we're going to spend a few minutes running through the year one projects. So it's a 5-year CIP, but we're just really going to talk about tonight the projects in year one. So I want to highlight a few of these. This matrix does show you how each of these projects relates into that strategic plan. But let's talk for a little bit about the farm project, that 116 acres that the town owns out on Lewisburg Road, where we're anticipating a future park facility. There is funding included in year one to provide or to produce 30% construction drawings for that site for the phase one. So phase one included all of the infrastructure for the site, the roads, water, sewer, parking lots, that sort of thing. It included the athletic fields on the eastern side of the property and the event center. That project would be funded through your parks capital fees. Second one I want to point out is under Goal 7, grow public safety to address future needs, which is the police building expansion. The adjoining unit to our existing police station is currently unoccupied, and the police department is proposing to expand their operations into that adjacent unit. With that, the lease for that facility would continue another 5 years, and they are anticipating that that facility would be able to meet their needs for at least the next 5 years or more with that expansion. That project would be funded through general fund revenues. Next one I want to point out here is the Public Works facility, which didn't really fall into any of the specific goals, but still comes under that larger key focus area of planned investment for the community. The Public Works facility is currently located on South Main Street, right near downtown. It is not the ideal location for a Public Works facility, not in keeping with your Main Street vision for this community and the long-term vision. In addition, we have the cobblestone project that's out there, that multi-use development that continues to move forward. Should that progress, that facility will need to be relocated anyway. So what we've proposed in year one is to identify a site for a new Public Works facility. Staff have already identified a site owned by NCDOT near the bypass, and funding would be included to evaluate the feasibility of that site for a public works facility, as well as the potential purchase of that site. Before I move on to other projects, are there any questions about those or anything else on this page?
Amy, help me to understand exactly where that site is that that the Public Works is talking about. Is it on 401 or is it on Young
So
Street?
if you leave downtown,
Yes.
East Young Street,
Mhm.
just before you get to the bypass, it's on the left-hand side.
It's between New Bethel and the
Catty
bypass.
corner.
Yes.
Wait, say that again?
It's between New Bethel Church property and the bypass. Once you go past the cemetery, it's that property between the cemetery and the bypass.
Okay.
And it's sort of behind
Behind.
the properties, you know.
Yeah, some houses on the road there, so it's kind of behind.
Okay.
Can I, on the farm, why we're choosing to go 30% design is for a few reasons, but primarily it is the amount of work that you need to have to seek grants also. So this will then allow you the opportunity to competitively seek grants in the future. So it does provide that opportunity.
All right, moving on. Another one I want to highlight here, maybe a little inappropriate, but Main Street Vision Plan. Goal 9, implement the Main Street Vision Plan. There actually is no funding, additional funding in next year's CIP. That's because we have adequate funding, we believe, at this moment to carry forward into next year, to continue the engineering work that needs to occur. So I included it, even though there's no additional funds, I included it on here because the work does continue on that project. Want to also bring up Goal 13, maintain and increase the town's financial strength. We are proposing to replace the town's financial software for next fiscal year. The vendor that we've had now, we have used since 1990. There have been some upgrades and enhancements to that, but it's been quite a long time. It's served our needs well. It is a system that is designed for very small municipalities. And we have found that with our growth, we are bumping up against the abilities of that software and feel that it's time now to go out and find something that has some new technology, will allow us to work in a more paperless environment and to make our payroll process in particular much more efficient and effective. That also would be funded through general fund revenues. Finally, I want to relate a little bit more information about the police vehicle fleet replacement. This is also an important program. We have a 5-year, well, I should say a 75,000 mile replacement program for police vehicles. We find that once they get to that age, they start costing more in maintenance, safety-wise, fuel economy. It's better to go ahead and sell them while we can still get a little bit of money for the salvage vehicle and then purchase a new one so that our police officers have adequate and reliable offices for them to work in as well, because that vehicle really is their office and where they operate out of most of their day.
So with the 75,000 miles, is that a target number? Is that the norm
Yeah, that's.
for municipalities? Is 75 the norm?
75,000 miles is a lot of miles on short driving, stop and go like they do. On road highway miles, it's not, but with what they encounter and what they do, mainly 95% of what they're doing is in town. That's tough on a vehicle.
But I'm saying, is that what the norm is for municipalities, for police? Okay, that's all.
That's when my cars start to act up.
I'm sorry, say it again.
That's when my cars start to act up a little bit.
I was just wondering, it wasn't a complaint, I was just wondering what that number was.
Okay, any other questions about items on this page before we move on?
I'm just curious because you put down the key focus areas, and it feels like some of those do fit under some of those goals, specifically community transportation plan. Does that not, and we don't have to do this now, I'm just asking.
Yeah, it was a judgment call here and
Okay.
there, yeah.
And the only reason I say that, because we created this beautiful document, which you know I adore. I carry this everywhere I go.
Me too.
But I like to put things in boxes and compartmentalize, so it shows that we're focused on our goals. And so my concern is if this is presented to the public at some point and they see these areas, it's like, well, where does that fit on the goals? So that's my concern, wanting to make the puzzle kind of fit together. Anyway, just a thought.
No, and I sort of ran into that same thing with the organizational excellence piece, where, you know, we want to replace our police vehicles.
Right.
It doesn't really quite fall into that planned investment, which was intended more for buildings, infrastructure. Vehicles don't fall into that, but at the same time, we're also supporting public safety by doing this.
Right.
So some things just didn't quite fit very neatly into those 16
Gotcha.
categories.
One thing to think about as we move forward, IT, you mentioned IT. And I think we're learning a lot from the pandemic here is, you know, our IT needs to be mobile where, you know, the staff can work outside of office here in case, you know, we need to do that. I know Triangle J was very lucky. They had just entered a contract with Kerry about 6 to 8 months ago to provide all their IT services, including computers, which was laptops and stuff. And they were able to move immediately from office to remote and had everything that they normally have, you know, by VPN and type things. So as we look at that going forward, I think we need to know that this thing may be ongoing.
So a little bit of update on that. We did enter into, starting January 1, a new relationship with Carolina's IT, who has brought a much bigger breadth and scope to IT for us, including last Monday, we're a week into it, we now have the capability of VPN. So they were here last Monday and got it all set up. So now we do have that ability to work fully from remote locations and get into our file systems and such. So that was a good step forward in light of what you bring it up. So
Awesome. Yay.
And to tie on to that with the equipment, we've created a new standard working with Carolina's IT that most of our staff, as they replace out their desktops, laptops are going to be our new standard equipment.
Good.
That makes sense.
who's that most? Oh, there's the one holdout. Never mind.
Well, there's a few. Well, plus the first one holdout, but also like our planning department, they do a lot of graphics files. They really need to have the power of the desktop, so we will have some sort of alternative available for them. But all right. Any other questions on CIP before we move on to our next topic? Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about revenues for next year. I'm going to sound like every news report right now. There's a lot of economic uncertainty out there, and no one knows what's coming. We've never been in this situation before. We don't know what this economic downturn is going to look like in terms of length or severity. So a lot of unknowns ahead of us, but we've done our best using what we do know to put together some projections and utilizing the input of some of our experts around us who deal with these revenues every day. So first one we want to look at is the property tax. Property tax is 58% of the town's general fund revenues, so a very important source of revenue for the operating budget of the town. You can look at this chart and see that we have had year-over-year growth in our property tax. So that's a good thing for the town. As we've had more people, we've had more revenues to help provide the services that they're demanding. If you'll notice, next fiscal year, 2021, is the red line. And you'll notice it's a little closer in terms of how well these things are spaced. It's a little closer to the year before than the other lines are. One of the things that we find that happens in an economic downturn is that the property collection rate tends to drop. We are very fortunate here in Wake County. We contract with Wake County. Marcus Kinraid was here a few months ago now to give you a presentation. His office does a fantastic job of actually getting those tax receipts in for what's billed out. So we have a great tax collection rate. But even so, in a downturn, there are some folks that just don't have the ability to pay. And so the collection rate goes down. So what we've done is accounted for that in our projections for next year. And that's why that red line sits a little more closely onto the line below it.
Is the
That
red
taken-
line revenue neutral?
That it reflects a revenue neutral rate, yes, sir.
That was my question. Thank you, Ronnie.
Yes. So assuming a revenue neutral rate, we are anticipating growth probably around 4 to 5% in our property tax revenues for next year.
And it's been being around 10%, I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Even with what's going on right now, we are anticipating some percentage of growth in that revenue, yes. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because the tax bills are gonna come out in the, in August, and that's pretty much taxing what's already on the ground. It's next year where we're gonna be concerned, in my opinion. I know the company that purchased stock building supply, has predicted, because they deal mostly with builders. They have started laying off staff, and they have predicted a 70% decrease in new home starts for the rest of this year because of this pandemic. That's kind of scary. Okay,
Yeah, but like I said, that would probably hit future years.
it'll hit next year.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so any other questions about property tax? Okay, we'll get into a little bit more about revenue neutral a little bit later. Your second largest source of revenue for operating expenditures in the general fund is the sales tax. This accounts for 17% of the operating revenues for the town. Just like the prior chart, let's ignore the red line for right now. There was year-over-year growth. We're seeing good growth in that revenue source for the last several years. This revenue source is highly economic dependent and can turn very quickly depending upon economic conditions. Based on the best sources of information we have available, at this time, we are anticipating that that revenue will experience a 5% decline in receipts compared to the year that we're in right now. Okay? And that assumes that some of that discretionary economic spending starts to go back towards its normal curve. Not fully back to normal, but starts to move in that direction over the summer and into the fall.
That's the low end of the conversation. It's between 5 to 10% consensus reduction-wise. So we chose the low end, but that may not be conservative.
So the budget you are building for next year is based on these lower projections as revenue?
That's correct. So now we can look at that red line, and if you notice, based on this decreased revenue expectation, you can see where that red line is not a year-on-year growth, that we're actually expecting to bring in somewhere closer to what we brought in for fiscal year 18-19. Okay. All right. Now we're going to change our orientation a little bit and move from operating into more capital program revenues. So these are your capital fees. These are those fees that come from new development, street fee, park fee, and previously water and sewer fees that you collected. This is a fund balance chart. So it represents a snapshot of one day in each of these fiscal years. This represents what the balance was in these fees on June 30th of each year. So you see street fees is in the yellow. It's fluctuated a bit. We accumulated funds for a while and we started spending them around FY 17-18. Most of those funds went to the East Young Street sidewalk, our Granite Falls Boulevard extension, and the Main Street Vision Plan, the Burlington Mills Road realignment. And then we're showing is for FY '21, '22, not a lot of significant expenditures in '21. We're going to regain some of that fund balance and spend a little bit in '22. Our park fees is the green line. Again, same thing. We accumulated some funds for a while, and we began spending for FY '18. That's where we bought the land for the farm, the 116 acres we talked about a little earlier. We've also spent some money on the master plan. And then the 30% plans funding would be coming out of this source as well. And then also included in next year's capital budget is some funding to acquire future park sites. So we can go ahead and acquire some land, set it aside for future development. So that's why you see the drop down for FY '21. Last is water and sewer. We stopped collecting these fees a couple of years ago, and so they're just maintaining where they are right now until we come to an appropriate use for those funds. They will just sit and collect interest. So for these are based upon the number of permits that we collect in a year. As Mr. Wilson just alluded to, we might be seeing some decreases over the next year or two. We have budgeted these revenues in a conservative way. Last year, we started the practice of budgeting the number of permits based on our 3-year average. So we have decided to knock that down just a little bit. So we're actually budgeting it on a little less than our 3-year average. We have a little margin for error in this projection. As you can see, street fees for next year, we're really just looking at accumulating that fund balance. There's no immediate projects we're going to spend it on. So if we don't hit our target there, we can at least get through for the short term.
So what's the number of units, do you know, that we're putting in the budget?
So we're basing it on 150 permits. Last year, we budgeted 190. So 2000, well, it's a little different because the budget year is a fiscal year. And what we have data for is a calendar year. So 2019 calendar year, we had 140. The year before that, we had 184. Yeah, what we're, for this fiscal year, we're estimating. Part of that's because of the townhome developments coming in, which tend to tally up a little more quickly.
Is it closer or farther apart when you do fiscal to fiscal year for the building permits? Like we do fiscal aligned with the budget?
Yeah, that I would have to, we'd have to go back and.
Just trying to see if it
Yeah,
kind of matches up a little bit better.
yeah. The issue is when it comes time to budget for the fiscal year, the best data we have is the calendar year because we're sort of in that interim
In that interim
6-month
period for time, yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yep,
Just curious.
yep. All right, questions here? All right, we're going to move on to sticking with fund balance, but moving on to the general fund now. Same thing, just like the other one. This is a snapshot on June 30th of each fiscal year. So a couple things we want to talk about here. Let's talk about the lines going across the chart. So those are our benchmarks for how much fund balance we have as a goal. The green line represents our internal policy. Town Board passed a policy in 2016 saying that you had a goal of keeping 33% of your operating expenditures in fund balance. Okay, so it's keeping 4 months of cash basically in fund balance. Fund balance is important because as we saw in one of those earlier charts, we typically don't get our revenues until November or December of the year. And so we have to operate on fund balance for a few months until that cash comes in. The other line on here is the LGC benchmark. So the State Treasurer's Office does look at all the municipalities, their fund balance, and says, do you have enough? Do you not have enough? What they do to come up with that benchmark is they look at what all your other population peers are doing, how much they have, and then they take 40% of that amount. And if you don't have 40% of your population peers, then you're going to get a letter from them saying, looks like you don't have enough fund balance. Okay? it works out for us, our internal benchmark lines up pretty well with that LGC benchmark. So as long as we aim for that, we're in usually pretty good shape.
Is it your revenue projection that helps determine your creditworthiness or not?
I'm sorry,
Portion of it?
is that what?
Is your revenue projection part of what helps determine your creditworthiness or not? The combination, I know it's more than just that.
You mean the credit rating that we would have? Yeah, there's a variety of factors that goes into that, including the, things that we don't even have control over, like your economic conditions. But yes, I mean, they're certainly going to look at fund balance as one of the important categories and making sure that you have. Yeah. So the last few years, you can see FY 18, 19, 20, we had excess fund balance and unassigned fund balance that we were saving up to use for future projects. We are now reaching that point where we are ready to use that funding and have appropriated some of that funding in our CIP for the next few years. The Public Works facility that I mentioned, that $500,000, would be coming out of that unassigned fund balance.
For what year?
So that-
2021?
That is 2021. Okay, so that's part of that drop from 20 to 21. A good part of that drop is that land purchase. Then we see another drop from 21 down to that last bar for 22. And that is the anticipated match for the LAP grant. Okay, for the Main Street Vision Plan to do the streetscape between Burlington Mills and Young Street. That's about $738,000. And we anticipate programming this unassigned fund balance towards that community investment project.
So, and I guess y'all did the numbers. It makes more sense from, I guess, our financial situation to hit this fund balance rather than to borrow it at the rate. It's pretty low rates right now. I mean, it's real cheap rates. So you're saying it's better to pay cash, because that's kind of what we're doing, rather than to borrow at this point in time.
So we haven't had that per se conversation. Absolutely. I mean, we show that as a cash outlay right now. If we get to that point, when you do that analysis, might be a better option. But we do have like for future years, if we build a building on this property, borrowing for that. We don't have the actual property purchase program.
Right. And, I know there's a benefit to keep our debt ratio low. And it is low. I think it's pretty low. Last time I looked, it's pretty low. So that's the advantage of not dipping into it. In the future, we'll have more debt ratio that we can borrow against and all. But, I mean, money is cheap right now. And that's,
Yeah, I think that is one of those things we'll just have to look at as we come closer to that actual land purchase.
Right.
What's the best way to go at that time?
And if we got the cash, you can always pay it off later, probably, if there's no penalty in that.
But the main point here too is that we can't afford those things.
Right.
To pay cash for those, and we still are within our benchmark.
Yeah, it's good to have options.
Yeah. Yep. The benchmark ends up being roughly 33% of operating expenditures. Yep. The last thing I'll mention is so those blue columns have they have a light blue, and then the later years have a dark blue. That darker blue represents the capital savings. In the last few years, we have set aside a portion of our operating budget to put aside for future capital projects. And so that's what that blue is, that funding remains as is. We're not proposing any uses for that at this time. But you can also see that for FY21 and beyond, at this time, we haven't been able to program any additional funds to go into that savings at this point within our CIP. All right, any other questions about fund balance? Okay. The good news is we're above that benchmark. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit more talking about revaluation, going back to property tax. So, as I mentioned, Mr. Kenray came and gave you all a presentation in January. Wake County's moved from an 8-year revaluation cycle to a 4-year revaluation cycle. So this was the year for the revaluation. The Rolesville's current property tax rate is 48 cents, and we have calculated out that the revenue neutral rate is 44 cents for revaluation. We're going to run through a couple of charts here real quickly. This one and the next really are here for reference. It's a lot of data. So what we're going to see in a couple of slides is taking this information graphically. But this just shows you tax rates throughout the county on a long-term historical basis. And then this also here shows you all of the other Wake County municipalities and what their revenue neutral rate is estimated to be. This was based on an early projection. I don't think anything's changed substantially, but these numbers might be slightly off from what the current numbers are. So what I've done is taken those two charts and put them together into one new chart. So this shows for all of the primary municipalities in Wake County, a 4-year historical and 1-year projected tax rate.
We
Okay?
don't have that chart.
No, it's not in your, it's only, I added it
Okay,
after the agenda went out.
okay.
Because I was struggling a bit myself with those detailed charts, and the picture was easier, I thought, maybe to understand. So with this, you can track through. You can see, for example, Wake County, the first unit, you can see what this shows you is that they've increased their property tax rate the last couple of years, okay? Like before, we're going to ignore the red bar right now, okay? Ignore the red data. So Wake County's increased the last few years. If you look at the next unit in this chart, Fuquay-Varina, their property tax rate's been steady the last several years. So you can just take that and read across. You can see a lot of jurisdictions have maintained stable rates, and a few have also had to raise rates over these last 4 years. And then you can see how they stack up against each other as well. So now if we add the red bar, so what the red bar represents is that revenue neutral rate,
44 cents.
well, for us, yes, for
Yes.
Rolesville, as well as that revenue neutral rate for each of those other units. Okay, it's based on this chart right here.
Okay,
That does not mean that's what they're going to adopt. Okay? All it's showing is what their revenue neutral rate is. As we can discuss on the next slide, we've been in contact with some other units, and the results change day to day. But there are some units that are anticipating adopting a tax rate that is above revenue neutral. It's for various reasons. Some of them are doing it to pay off debt. Some of them are doing it for capital programs. Some of them are doing it to address some expanded operating services. Well, one I know because they've come out and said it, like Wake Forest, as a result of their merger with the fire department, they anticipate having to raise that tax rate a few cents to address the merger.
3 cents. 3,
But that's 3 cents more than their neutral.
that's correct.
Correct.
So we're technically not, if we're at 48 now and our neutral is 44, you're not raising anything if you stay at 48.
but we're raising the tax burden because that 44 is on the new tax value of the house.
True. But I mean,
So-
you're always going to pay more for something that goes up in value.
Yeah, but if we stay at 48, well, or if we stayed at 48, it's going to represent a tax increase for our residents.
Technically, yeah.
Yes.
Wendell is increasing because they're building a new town hall.
Did not get direction from them of which way they're planning to go at this time.
Who else? There was 6, right, you said?
Yep.
I knew those two specifically. Yeah.
Whether or not they were in close proximity to one another.
Zebulon's recommended is at 0 right now, is revenue neutral.
And like I said, part of the challenge is because everything is so uncertain right now, that their plans change before. So, until the proposed budgets come out, the commitments are thoughts on what they're going to do.
Yeah, most mayors, I guess this is a good time to say this, most mayors are doing somewhat what we're doing. They're asking for a revenue neutral budget. And that's kind of what we're asking for, is a revenue neutral budget. But knowing that if it's not, then we need to see what the difference is. Like, for example, you mentioned Wake Forest. Wake Forest, if they don't go revenue neutral, they'll go 3 cents to pay for the merger of the fire department. So you know what you're getting for that. And I think that's what we kind of ask for too, is, what is a revenue neutral budget? And if we don't go revenue neutral, why? What are we getting out of that? What are we getting out of the revenue?
Yeah, I'm the last one in the world that wants to vote for a tax increase. I'll tell you. But this fire department thing is going to bite us in the butt if we don't do something soon, because these firefighters who we have trained can go to other municipalities and get benefits. And we've got to remember that.
Yeah, I think you don't mind, I ask it a different way.
Okay.
I go, what can't you do? We have a basket of goods that we have in front of us, and I led off this conversation saying I still don't have the answer for some of that basket of goods. And you've done a good job, I think, for 2 years, trying to put some money aside to use for future leverage for bond indebtedness for projects. The recommended budget at revenue neutral will not have that recommendation. That would go towards potentially debt, police facility, town hall improvements, operational needs. I mean, I guess what you were putting aside was for debt, so it's probably going to be for a big operation. Could be a match if we have insufficient funds for the farm plan when we do kind of that, because that's going to take a big max of funds that will be park improvement fees, grants, and X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Which could be also general funds. So the question I've been wrestling with is, what if we go revenue neutral, what we might not be able to do, or better question might be, what will get delayed, potentially. In today's current environment, particularly, it may get further delayed. But I fully appreciate what you said, Mr. Wilson, is also in today's environment, is this the right time to be talking about anything over beyond revenue neutral? That's where I want to kind of leave you tonight saying, think about it. We have about 30 days, or maybe 20 days, to think about it. Because I'm going to give you a recommended budget, but I'm not going to give you something that I know you won't support. But I do want to maybe at the next meeting even kind of come back around this and have a conversation with you all. What do you think? What's your thinking? Because part of it is fiscal, part of it is philosophy, part of it is what's the crystal ball say. And I can tell you there's probably, if we get that right answer perfect, good for us. I don't know if there's going to be a perfect answer, a right answer. So I'm not here tonight to tell you to make a decision and or expect you to make that decision. What I want you to absorb is this information tonight. Think about it a little bit, and then give me some guidance here in the next 3 weeks where you stand so we can talk about that. But that's kind of where we are. Now, there will be, in the operating budget, I'll be recommending two positions, but other than that, it's almost a zero-based budget. So the reality is, at revenue neutral, you can do some project planning. You could probably do a public works facility. You could have some slight modifications in operating. And that's about it. You won't be able to set aside a whole bunch of money for future plans much, and things like that. So that's kind of the gist of that conversation. But don't get me wrong, revenue neutral, if you look at that 4 pennies, reel back that. The 4 pennies at $125,000 each, right? That's about what a penny is, 125 roughly?
Meal,
That's a $500,000.
So it's $500,000, that's right.
or 4 meals, or quick question.
Yeah.
And I think tonight is the first time I've actually seen the line differences because of what you're projecting of the new economy with the, the last 6 weeks of the pandemic. So, we had the revenue neutral 6 weeks ago. There was going to be a certain number. So do we know with your new lines how many pennies or meals it represents a reduction in revenues? Do we know that? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. So what we're going to come in with the revenue budget estimate will be reduction wise or neutral. What would have been?
Yeah, we would have had revenues prior to 6 weeks ago.
It's the sales tax. It's going to be with the 5% sales tax.
Yeah,
Do you
but
know?
also the other line, the average tax line was a little bit closer than.
A little bit.
It
yeah.
was. I would just, going off my rough numbers here.
Tonight.
Tonight,
Yeah, tonight.
don't hold me to these.
We'll change
I would say we probably lost about a penny's worth through our property tax re-projection. And we've probably lost between 3 and 4 pennies
Really?
in our sales tax
Wow.
3 or 4 pennies of the
of revenue,
revenue.
equivalents of revenue, yes. Because it's gone down, we lost about 450, a little bit more than 450,000 in sales tax revenue.
Starting from when? Can you pinpoint when?
Our budget estimate
From the estimate.
for next year, what we're recommending next year.
And that came from what, Wake County?
So the guidance has been all over the board, but everybody's in that 5 to 10% reduction. So we took the more liberal side and are estimating 5%. It could be higher. So yeah, we're at and most of it is the sales tax reduction.
Yeah, by far. The sales tax reduction accounts for most of the lost revenue.
So if we reduce that by 5%, that's equivalent to how much reduction?
Yeah, 3 cents maybe a little, let's see. It went from,
Why don't you dig into that? I know you're trying to.
yeah,
play it
let me
off
give you
the
better
hill.
numbers rather than
But
sit here trying to
really-
guess.
Really,
Yeah.
it's two ways to look at revenue neutral. One way is to look at it the old way that we was looking at it, because, we was gonna get the same revenues and it'd be a big increase because of the property value going up. But then another way to look at it is from pure revenues, what are we losing from pure revenues because of the pandemic, And you're saying maybe as much as 400,000.
Let me crunch those numbers.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is anticipate a meeting in 2 weeks, get out a 1-page or 2-page kind of summary of where we stand, so you can start having more information besides this in front of you, including that kind of information, and you can do the evaluation too.
Because really, I guess the way I look at it, Jackie, actual revenue neutral shouldn't affect the budget at all. I mean, you know, it's the same, you're getting the same amount of money, you're just getting it from a different percentage because, you know. But it looks like this pandemic has kind of, you know, really messed up the true revenues.
I agree with that. And I think 5% is conservative. If we don't go back to work soon, it's going to be more than that. So, and I think it's going to come a time when we got to look at that budget and we got to decide what's a want and what's a need.
Yeah.
And the wants are going to have to get on the back burner for a while.
Right.
We're going to have to deal with the needs.
So when we get into capital plan, we spend a little time on that tonight. We could spend more time tonight, but the plan itself is opportunity, needs, and commitments, pre-commitments already. There really isn't much wants in there except for maybe the public works facility, which I think is needed, but it has an opportunity to get on a good piece of land potentially. But what I've been thinking, I've talked to the mayor about, is that whatever we adopt in today, just like we did, I don't know what you did back in the recession of 08, 9, 10, but what I did with the board I worked with at that time was we would spend a monthly review of the finances. You would spend some time on that monthly to check in where you are, and you would have a conversation are we a go or no go on projects, so that you are comfortable that you are going to go. But if we're not ready to go because of whatever situation, we're not going to go. So the budget, in my opinion, to some level, this budget's can be the budget, but there's going to be a monthly check-in and conversation where we're going. And if there's a need to adjust, we're going to have to make those adjustments.
Understand. Okay.
Which actually leads us right into our operating budget preview. And the first thing to talk about is this economic uncertainty. So we've already addressed some of it with talking about monitoring where we are and making sure that before we make any major expenditures that we ensure that those revenues are in place and we can see what things are coming in there. All right. We also want to talk a little bit in terms of this operating budget preview, talk a little bit about some employee issues. So a year ago is when we had the presentation and adopted a new pay plan for the town. And at that time, what we did is we suspended the employee performance evaluation system and said we were going to turn around and spend the next year revamping that system and then come back with something new and better and improved. And so we have done that. It's been a joint effort among our HR staff and the management team, and we also had an employee group that got together and reviewed proposals and provided some feedback. So altogether, that group has developed what we now call a performance coaching system. So the old days of an annual review are gone and are replaced with bi-monthly coaching sessions between an employee and their supervisor. So every 2 months, each employee will be getting together with their supervisor to fill out kind of a simple evaluation form. We've streamlined it, but made sure that we emphasize those things that are really important, like developing professional goals, performance goals. And then there's also a section where we want to coach employees to exhibit to exhibit behaviors that are consistent with those values that we adopted as well. So we have behavior descriptions that show this is what an employee does who is collaborative. They demonstrate these things. So it's a simple form. It's 1 page, front and back, and the idea is that it would be filled out every two months as each employee meets with their supervisor.
It would be interesting to see what the employees have to say about their supervisors as well. I'm just saying.
Some 360 reviews.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be like a checks and balances, but
Sure.
I know we're.
Yeah. So
On that form, though, are there some rankings, or is it just a conversation?
it's really emphasized more about how you're setting goals and then how you're doing towards achieving those goals. And then, yeah, a conversation about behaviors. It's about coaching. There's some opportunity for measurement within those goals. You know, obviously some departments are going to have an easier time with coming up with some quantitative goals, whereas others may be a little more challenged to come up with some quantitative. But we're all going to go through some training and try to find some good ways to implement something that's specific and measurable. for
Sounds
those
like the
employees.
military. They
Yes.
do a lot of counseling statements, I
Yeah,
believe they
we'll
call
try.
it.
So when we originally went into this, when we talked a year ago, we had talked about maybe going back to the anniversary date system. But as we got into this, and even after talking to employees, we found that really the focal date was something that was preferred by supervisors and employees. They found that was easier, so that everybody is getting sort of their annualized summary of what's happened the last year, all at the same time. It's easier for supervisors. You don't have to keep up with dates for all the employees. And the employees found that that was also a fair system as well. Everybody's getting the same increase at the same time. So instead of doing anniversary date, we decided to go with focal date.
Did you say the same increase at the same time?
Well, everybody has the opportunity for an increase at the same time.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
put it that way.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's not what I heard first time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, but tying on to that, what's also being proposed through this is that it would be a flat percentage. So it's not necessarily, you know, if this employee scores this number, they get this percent, or if they score that number, they get this other percent. Because we're implementing this performance coaching system, what we're expecting is that employees will fall into that standard deviation, right? Most employees perform somewhere around where they're expected. And you have a few employees who are not. And now we're hoping that with this coaching, with this regular review, we'll be able to keep up with those employees. And we either push them up into the middle or, you know, work on some sort of performance improvement plan, okay? So that's also part of the philosophy with this, is that we're recognizing that most of our employees are operating somewhere here where they're supposed to be. And long-term, we've talked with this employee group about trying to find some way to reward those employees at the far end as well. Haven't gotten there yet, but that is on our menu as we move forward. So for this upcoming operating budget, we're anticipating that focal date being November 1st. Couple of reasons, as we've just talked about tonight, is we need to see how things go with the economy. And we want to make sure that we're able to address the needs of the town. And then also what's happened because of this COVID-19 is that we've delayed the implementation of this coaching program. We were literally ready to go, to begin training and start rolling this out when all of a sudden face-to-face became less of a reality. So the coaching, we're hoping we can do it under our revised social distancing, but we've gotten a little delayed with that rollout. And so we're having to delay that focal date a little bit this year as well. The amount that we set aside for employees will be based on that pay philosophy that you adopted a year ago as well, the same time that you did the pay plan adjustments. Okay. If I remember, let's see, it states that the philosophy seeks to position the town to provide a base salary that meets or exceeds the local employment market. So where we go with that number will depend a lot upon what's happening out in our local area as well. All right, questions on these issues? All right, so now we're going to wrap up with our operating budget preview with just a quick preview of important dates. We've already talked about these earlier tonight. We're anticipating delivering the recommended budget at your second meeting in May. And then the public hearing, in whatever form it may end up occurring, would occur on June the 2nd. So once that public hearing is held, Because 10 days will have passed from when you were presented the budget, you will have the opportunity to adopt the budget on June 2nd if you so choose, or you can defer to a later meeting in June. But it has to be adopted no later than July 1. That's all I have.
That's
Thank you.
it.
We kind of breezed through the capital a little bit and related to strategic plan, but I want to make sure that you've had a chance to look at the document that we did. And if you have any questions, I know a couple of you read it. You brought some good questions myself. But is there anything that you saw in the capital that you have questions about tonight, or perspective? Can you turn on your mic? Okay, thank you. There you go. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I know you said it's going to depend on the money and what we can afford to do at that time, correct? All right. Now I'm still processing what you said and what I saw. So.
Well, so there's going to be a couple things in play pretty quick once if the budget gets adopted in June 1st or thereabouts. The couple will occur. We'll need some direction and discussion on in May pretty quickly, and that would be the Public Works facility. So we have a 2-month hold on that adjacent facility next door, and then it would be released come June 1st. I think we can get extension through June.
How many square feet do they need?
Do they need?
Yes.
If you ask them, it's probably exactly that size, that building. No, sorry.
It's about 1,200 or 1,300 square feet. It's either 12 or 1,300, right?
Is it like a 3-bay building, or, I mean, that kind of gives me an idea.
Is it a what?
Is it like 3-bay building, or? what?
No, it's so the current police department, it's adjacent to the current police department, and the current police department at the back end wraps around this building. So it's the size of this building, and do you have a square footage? We may have it, if we can find it, is embedded within, it's exactly the same size as the front 3/4 of the existing police department. So the chief likes the space because it allows him to be able to have more of a bigger meeting room than we met in for our budget. It lets him have more office space for his staff. And then what we want to do is have more of a customer service orientation to that facility and really use that front space that we're not using right now to a better ability. But it does allow him to kind of spread his wings a little bit more and not be so much on top of each other. So he thinks it works for him as he continues to grow and expand. 5 years from now, I anticipate if we go at our current growth and we have some success in the commercial end, there will probably be a need for additional police staffing. It won't be this year. I'm not going to make any recommendations for additional police staffing. I'm going to recommend that we make an adjustment and bring in a part-time evidence technician who will take over the evidence room.
You were talking about police. No, I said
Yeah.
Public Works.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I said, how much?
Excuse
I
me.
heard Public Works.
Yeah.
I am so sorry.
You said Public
I said,
Safety.
I am
how
so
much square
sorry.
footage do
Okay.
they need?
I was
Thank
really
you
doing.
for
I was really doing. I was
explaining
really
that,
doing well in the
You
police.
did. Good job, Kelly.
So anyway, that's the rationale for a police department. The public works space. We have a Butler building sketched right now. I think it's a 2-bay with a yard with some back room area, and I don't know the square footage off the top of my head. I could get that for you, Jackie.
It's like a 2-bay building.
Yeah, 2 or
I
3.
was wondering why you brought Bay up for the police department.
Yeah,
I
I'm
was like,
sorry.
okay.
Police
I was.
department does have bays, some of them.
Yeah, I do apologize. I misheard you.
Forgot what they call them, but.
I will get you a square footage of our footprint as we have it right now
Or Public Works.
for public works.
So you mentioned earlier, where we at with the with the property? You doing some kind of valuation with it, or?
So DOT has it on hold for us. That they went through a bid process and had no bidders. It's been sitting there 2 years since the bypass, since they did that process. So it's 10 acres, and we've kind of looked at it and thought at the time, and we do still think that the appraisal they took at the time is a fair appraisal. And top of my head, JG's on standby, but the appraisal value is, I think it's at 25,000 an acre, thereabouts. So
It's like 15 acres.
10, I think it's just over 10.
Now you're talking about cobblestone. What are you talking?
No, we talking about
No.
the,
No, the DOT parcel.
East Young
DOT parcel by
401.
the bypass.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Here's what's intriguing about that parcel. What's intriguing is half of it is in the watershed, the other half is not. We have an individual who owns property that fronts this parcel who has said, we would be interested in joint development with you, town, so that we can use the hard corner potentially for some purposeful commercial use. And if we do a joint development agreement with them, then they would be helping us jointly develop, and we would be able to use part of that parcel plus the watershed parcel. That's why now I want to do an evaluation of this idea, make sure it's a good idea. It appears.
that's the question I had. What is the valuation? What are you looking at? Who,
I want to do how much is usable space, how to lay it out, how would you access soils, conditions. I want to do kind of a pretty good analysis before I come to you and say we should buy it. We have not done that yet.
how long does that take?
The evaluation. So I have presented to our 2 on-call engineers and asked for them to do that evaluation. We have 25,000. No, we have more than that. I think we have about $50,000 to do that analysis for us in this budget. And I've asked them to have all that work done by the end of the year, if we start July 1, if not earlier.
That includes phase one.
Yes,
And you say end of the year, you're talking about in December. not-
2020, yes. Because DOT is not going to hold it for us forever. And if they don't, then they'll release this and they will go off and rebid it. JG is now asking this. Here's the response to your question, Mr. Wilson. JG says it's similar to a fire department sized building, 80 by 100, 8,000 square foot, includes bays, offices, indoor storage, 30 acre site, of which 15 acres, a little over $450,000. I was kind of close.
I was thinking about 15 acres about.
So there's your summary. Did you get that? Did you all get that?
Yeah.
Repeat.
80 by 100, 8,000 square foot building proposed, includes bays, offices, and indoor storage, and a storage yard. It's $30,000 an acre at 15,000 acres, a little over $450,000. It's a purchase price. We have $50,000 to do the assessment. Therefore, that's why the
That's the land only, it's not the building.
That's right. So that's $500,000 to do the assessment. If the assessment comes out right, we would buy it. And then we have an estimate of $1 million to build a building.
Did you say 450 to do the assessment?
No, 450 to buy the land.
Okay, I'm getting tired, okay.
That's right.
Now,
That's why
we're talking about $500,000 in hard and soft cost in the price of the land.
Gotcha. Okay, that's
All
what I
right, but
thought
then we're also
initially, but
talking
then I
about $1
was
million
Build a
to build a building.
That's right.
So we're looking at 1.5.
Unless we
Pardon the
do a joint development of some sort with the developer who might help reduce some of the expenses.
And this is certainly an item that we can take into closed session with regard to the acquisition of real property.
And I'm okay talking about it to some level because we are talking about,
Already public
it's a
property,
DOT,
DOT.
there's a DOT. But as far as the balance of how we do it, may need some conversation.
Okay.
I come from two places on that public works facility. One is if we have some success on cobblestone, we have to be ready to move. Two is, as we continue to grow and expand our public works needs, that facility, I appreciate you all taking the action and getting them a spot and location, but it really doesn't fit the Main Street Vision plan down there. And in 3 years from now, when the Main Street Vision opens up and we have a newly recreated intersection in there, I'm not certain how that facility works and looks in there.
The current facility.
That's right, the current facility.
Current facility.
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Okay.
I have a question totally off to another topic, kind of related to the budget though. The last page in our documents talks about the permitting activity. And I need some help clarifying total lots, plotted lots, issued permits, and then lots available for permits. Because my simple math didn't work, so I said there must be an algebraic formula that I'm missing. So on the last page, page 142, the very last beautiful chart, can somebody explain to me why those numbers don't add up? What am I missing? So for example, when I look at Carlton Point,
Okay.
so I see 292 lots, plotted lots 272, 3 were permitted, and lots available
Yeah, doesn't add up, does it?
8. So is it supposed to add up?
I think you're right.
I'm just trying to say, does it? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's some additional
I never
information
understood this chart.
that's
so-
not there.
We'll make
Plotted
it-
lots versus recorded lots?
Yeah, total lots versus platted lots is
They
And it-
plotted them, but they have not recorded them.
that's right.
That's it.
But it still doesn't equal the number.
So I guess I'm trying to understand, does that mean that's the total available lots, that first column?
Yes,
Because
eventually. So I've kind of gotten this a couple
There's numbers
times.
missing from it, that's why.
that's what I'm saying, there must be
No,
some
no, I think it's
additional figure
intentional.
that's
Like,
not
if you
here.
have
Look
lots
at
that are
per
already
farm.
issued, when you have 292 total
Don't
lots,
post
Right.
there could be more columns on here to balance out those numbers.
So like Perry Farms, Ronnie made a good point. Perry Farms has total lots 115, plotted lots 41, 0 permits were issued in March, and then 10 lots available for permits.
So that means construction. So they built the infrastructure and such, and they can go ahead and build on those. That total lots available for permits, meaning that there are that many lots ready. If tomorrow somebody walked in and pulled 10 permits, they could build on those lots. And then they would have to go out and build more infrastructure for the balance of the outstanding
31
lots that are
lots.
not available. That's
Gotcha.
right.
So there's another number out here
Would be the-
somewhere where there's
Yes.
lots are already built on. Is
Yeah.
that what I'm missing here?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm like, there's a missing number in this formula.
Yes, the currently built upon lots is what you're missing.
That would be helpful for the
Yep.
math to add up,
Yep.
just for me. I'm
Yep.
simple. I just need the math to add up.
I think they were assuming that everybody knows their
I
way of
agree.
doing it, but
I
that's,
was like,
If it helps, I had this same question. Lots available for permits is a subset of platted lots. And you can do the subtraction between total lots and platted lots to find out what is still out there in the preliminary subdivision status. Has not been recorded.
those are the columns that they don't put on there.
so Averett Ridge, 158.
Means they have platted every lot,
Okay.
and there are 29 lots ready to have a permit pulled out of the 158.
Gotcha. Okay.
And with all those big fat eggs on there, that explains why the numbers are down for permits that were issued in the month of March. Or should I say zeros?
But then I see permits went up for building activity for like additions and stuff. People are doing improvements.
Yeah, subcontractors are staying busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually look at more of what's the lots available for permits because
That's no construction, that's no money.
Right, and that's not a large inventory.
Correct.
That's, your inventory is shrinking in town. And so that's why we had that bulk of activity over the summer and this fall, is to get the next building phase lined out, which will open up this building lot inventory. But if we don't have any of that start occurring soon, your current lot inventory is shrinking.
You definitely don't want to see zeros under issues permitted, though. That's never a good sign when you see it like multiple months in a row.
Thanks, everybody.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, got a motion. Do I hear a
Second.
second? All right, any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks for coming tonight, guys. Hope we got a little bit accomplished, Kelly.
Yep, thank you.
Is it 9 o'clock? I don't know what it is. Okay.
You guys stay